A human being has three distinct active parameters: his body, his emotions, and his intellect. In order to be fit and well-rounded, you need to exercise your body and intellect and experience emotion. So, discounting the time you spend sleeping, say 6 hours per day, you need to spend 6 hours physically exerting yourself, 6 enjoying what the earth has to offer, and another 6 developing your intellect. There's a lot of overlap. You can have fun playing a sport or reading a very intelligent book. You might be learning at work or loading a truck, getting physical exercise as well. I think everyone can agree that if you are seriously deficient in any of these three things, you're not going to be quite satisfied with your life. And I think everyone would agree that the most serious deficiency today is in the intellectual realm, with physical fitness coming in a close second. What most have in overabundance is an emotional life. You don't have to do any work to have emotions. Emotions are the responses to stimuli in the environment that cause a sense of well-being or distress, because those stimuli are being compared to the stored information in your brain. That is, even without any conscious effort on your part. Your brain is being filled with data automatically, simply because you can see, hear, touch, taste, etc., and that mass of information will become, by default, the standard which determines how your feelings will be expressed. If you do not consciously manipulate the automatic storage of information, it will be stored by means of some filing system not of your own design or choosing. The development of an intellect is the process of ordering information in your mind according to your own discoveries about the world. Thus, if you spend time developing an intellect, you develop a separate, independent self. If you have no intellectual life, you will become a parrot for other people's opinions with no distinct self. A life without an intellect is no human life at all, just as life with no body is no human life. Visualize here a severed head, kept alive artificially. He sees, talks, and thinks, but can't swat that fly on his nose. Would you like to live without a body? Would you like to live without emotion, like a robot? Then why would it be desirable to live without an intellect? You can now see why a person without a developed intellect is forced to respond to an intellectual argument he doesn't agree with by either an emotional outburst or a physical assault. He simply has no intellectual arrows in his quiver with which to shoot back. You have to make your own arrows. Nobody can help you. If someone is telling you what to say, you're his parrot and not you yourself. This takes work on your part. There is no way around it. If you want to be a real person, you have to do the mental work to become one. The development of an intellect requires the use and understanding of these principles, and yet more that I've forgotten at present. If you understand them explicitly, the only thing you need to supply is the hard part, the actual work. The time you need to invest to develop an intellect in any given area of human interest is common knowledge. It takes about 2,000 hours to develop an understanding of any fairly complex subject, but that's not enough to get a job in that area. You're just then ready to apprentice. At 5,000 hours, you've sort of mastered the craft. You have an excellent knowledge of what's already known and can competently work in that area. At 10,000 hours, people ask you questions and expect you to know the answer, and you probably do, generally. At 20,000 hours, you don't have to hold a candle to anyone. You are a full-fledged representative of your chosen field. You may be making original contributions to that field. I personally have about 100 to 180,000 hours of intellectual experience, depending on how you measure it. I get up and start thinking of something and continue for most of the day, every day for 52 years, not including the first 14 years of my life, of which much was spent taking long walks, to think. Even at 4 years old, I knew what a philosophical peripatetic excursion was. I just didn't have the words to say that. About 10 hours per day times 365 days times 52 years is over 180,000. I have acquired in this time a small handful of gold, some would say fool's gold, and a pile of tailings roughly the size of Khufu's pyramid. 40 to 50,000 are in the core principles of physical existence that deal with why there is anything at all. About 30 to 40 are in the development of consciousness from nothing. At least 20 formulating a viable template for government, and the rest is spread out over multiple fields, in which I would class myself as a little better than an apprentice, ranging down to dilettante. A dilettante is someone who knows enough Spanish to get himself killed in Tijuana. Bear in mind, however, that I am not an intellectual. To be an intellectual requires, absolutely, a university degree or an acting career, preferably in Hollywood. Integration consists of taking in disconnected information and reordering it into a hierarchical structure, with basic percepts and concepts at the top and individual instances at the bottom. Your brain, without effort on your part, will perform this function. All animals can do at least some of this. What all animals do, I call free induction. It is the accumulation of numerous examples of similar objects that results in the formation of a percept. The percept is formed when the area of the brain assigned to that accumulation overflows like a bucket being filled. Physical information overflow is the congruent identity of the percept that comes into existence. It is the mechanism by which the physical brain creates and reorders its associated phase space. The operations of your brain occur in normal physical space. Your mind is the phase space construct that runs congruently with it and is causally attached to it. I'm not going to go too far down this rabbit hole here, but suffice it to say that the phase space associated with physical space is no more nor less real than physical space. After all, neither exists apart from logic. There is no stuff in existence upon which logic operates. The stuff we see is the identity of logic, the thing itself. The physical things in the world are the geometric embodiment of logic, not its subject. Which is to say, there is no spoon. But unlike the matrix spoon, you can't bend it with your mind directly. You can, however, bend it with your mind indirectly according to the appropriate logical rules, which is to say, grasp it at both ends, then give your hands a bit of a power twist. A visual percept is a picture of the object stripped of all but the essential characteristics that separate that type from all others, generally a stick figure or outline. The value of doing this is that the stick figure, containing only the essential information needed to differentiate it from other objects, requires less computational work to bounce it around inside your skull. Along with visual appearance, we assign other characteristics from other senses and experiences, such as dangerous or friendly, sweet, sour, salty, auditory characteristics, and so forth. Various perceived characteristics can now be collected under an arbitrary symbol that will constitute a concept. Again, the overflow of a percept bucket constitutes the identity of the associated concept formed in phase space. A concept is the smallest possible information unit that can arbitrarily designate a class of concretes or percepts or other collections of concepts in the environment or within our minds. This is the least information cost when we do the mental algebra of comparative analysis. We compare and classify concepts. Concepts can also be assigned to actions. Thus, after comparing and classifying an object, we get a strategy associated with that object, like run away or eat this food, or mathematical operations, or rules of projective geometry, or how to design an airplane. What thinking in general does is to maximize the efficiency of the brain to effect its assigned task, which is the preservation and continuation of you as an individual unit. All animals do free induction automatically. Higher animals form percepts by free or forced induction. Forced induction is done by concentrating, which is the act of focusing on a single aspect of existence, resulting in the whole brain sending information about that object to a central location, where the object of interest can be compared and classified and assigned a new symbol. That is, it gets conceptualized and saved as that symbol. Or in the case of already known objects, a new strategy can be formed, or new aspects can be added under the heading of that concept. A word is a concept. When uttered, it calls forth all the information about that concept automatically for further study. Words are visually stored at 8 bits per letter if we compare them to computer technology. So cow requires 3 bytes, whereas the percept cow, which is an outline of a cow, might require a few hundred bytes. Spoken words are coded by way of the jaw, lip, and tongue positions required to form the word. Think in words and you will sense your mouth trying to form them. Thinking in words is the highest form of thinking, and is what Aristotle called nous, a conversation with oneself. However, if your conversation becomes audible, you may be considered a nut. When we make our hierarchical conceptual structures, we must have a standard with which to do comparative analysis. To classify is to compare to a standard. All we can actually think of is stuff like A is greater than B and B is greater than C, therefore A is greater than C, and other such simple logical propositions. By combination and extension of a line of reasoning, we can come to more complicated conclusions. Then we name the conclusion and voila, another concept. So a concept can be a name for an entire complex chain of mental progressions, that is, a program. Thinking is the holistic process of the brain. Reasoning is making linear chains, and integration is the process of making the hierarchical structure. A human being is that animal that grasps the operation of his brain and attempts to augment it by forced induction. Now it may be that some higher animals do forced induction. If a monkey stares fixedly at a problem and comes up with an answer, he's doing forced induction. But no monkey ever grasps the efficacy of reason and attempts to apply it universally. It never becomes his greatest interest. It's strictly for practical use in solving matters at hand. A monkey can only structure percepts into a concept on a case-by-case basis. Animals never contemplate mental abstractions with an eye to further integration of these abstractions into larger concepts. An animal never creates a new overarching principle from the overflow of a concept bucket because it never contemplates or studies concepts as internalized logical units. It does not categorize concepts. Animals don't contemplate eternity because eternity is an overarching abstract principle encompassing many concepts. A human being, at least some of them, though all are capable of it, continues to structure concepts into higher concepts that subsume those beneath them in an extended hierarchical structure. Thus a human being can understand. To understand means that concepts in the hierarchy stand under, are subsumed by, yet higher concepts. The totality of our conceptual hierarchy is our knowledge. The thread that goes from a higher concept to a lower one is called an explanation. To explain is to make out of simpler concepts under which stands the concept or percept to be explained. An explanation can also be a linear string of objects and interactions that leads to a result, wherein the result is what needs explaining. The standard we use to perform conceptual comparative analysis is called a soul. Your soul is the best example of successful forced induction performed by an individual. It is judged best by comparison to the successes of free induction, which are all but infallibly correct. So if you make a great inductive guess, you'll be able to know it based on previous successful free inductions. The biggest difference between free and forced induction is the work done by you when you concentrate. You acquire your finalized soul at about 1 year of age, not at conception. What you get in the early fetal stage is called orgasm, which is the instant that the fetus becomes self-aware. It's the very first bucket that overflows. But this doesn't figure into thinking, unless you're thinking with your penis. Orgasm gets hooked up with sex to provide you with some attention-getting experience that seems desirable. That is, it's good to be self-aware, because it means that you're not dead. Orgasm just means, I exist as I am. Whereas when you hook that up with your soul, it means, I exist and I am good. Which means you're getting a verification of your identity, as well as a moral validation. A lion mounting a female achieves through orgasm the sense of his proper identity as the dominant male. But not that life is good or evil in the moral sense. It's just the fulfillment of his design. A human being, on the other hand, has to contend with not only the physical purpose of his design, but also whether he is morally right or wrong in the abstract conceptual realm. If you grasp forced induction and acquire a soul, then use that soul as a standard of comparison for the acquisition and construction of new concepts, then you will make errors in judgment, which are always taken as a reflection on the value of that standard. Thus, if your new idea turns out to be wrong, it impugns the validity of your soul, and because your soul is the seat of human identity as a conceptual being, if it is invalid, you are, ipso facto, worthless as a human being, and should straightway go and kill yourself. You make mistakes in forced induction because, unlike free induction, which forms percepts by an overflow mechanism, forced induction is the attempt to guess from the contents of an unfilled bucket what the concept associated with it will be. The advantage of guessing is that forced induction, when coupled with empirical evidence, is perhaps 1,000 times faster than free induction. If you want to design a washing machine using free induction, you might wait around for 100,000 years for the necessary perceptual buckets to achieve overflow. But if you take a guess by forced induction, then test your guess in the real world by experiment. If it succeeds, you don't have to fill the rest of the bucket to get that perfect free induction success rate. Your success is verified by empirical evidence rather than by the freely induced exhaustion of all possibilities. The downside is that the higher initial failure rate causes depression due to the implications of failure, which is that your soul is no good or defective in some manner. Essentially, with forced induction, your brain feeds a central location with all the available data to make the guess. You compare the guess with your soul, and if it's at all similar, you take that out into the real world for a test. If it works, you're all pumped up. But if it doesn't, it's a reflection on your soul, and maybe you're just a worthless bum after all. I count 3 fundamentally different degrees of forced induction. First degree forced induction is what a fine artist does. Presented with a blank canvas, his task is to make a good painting, of which there are innumerable valid examples. There are also crap paintings. An artist just splashing paint onto a canvas is like a person without an intellect throwing a tantrum because he has nothing to offer in the realm of thought. The difference between a Jackson Pollock and a Leonardo da Vinci is the difference between someone devoid of intellect and someone with an immense one. If a person invests a great deal of his time in the development of his intellect, he will not be able to bear making vomit simulations. Second-degree forced induction is what a scientist does. There are gaps all over the structure of human knowledge. A scientist must connect the loose structures to the bigger one by filling in some gap. That gap often requires the induction of a concept that fills that gap. The gap is framed by the upper and lower completed levels. Third-degree forced induction is trying to find the concepts that connect everything. It's not like filling a gap. There is no gap. There is no ceiling there to aim at, just a floor. Third degree is the attempt to find new logical rules that will serve to connect very large independent pieces into a single structure. If first and second degree forced induction are performed on dry land, third degree is performed in a swamp. There are many more pitfalls and opportunities for disaster here. Few people will go here because of the prospect of near continuous failure. And failure at forced induction is always taken as a reflection on one's soul. Consequently, there are many suicides and mental breakdowns in the Cantorian swamp. I named it after the mathematician. Going into the Cantorian swamp is like climbing Mount Fuji in Japan. They have a relevant saying. He who has not climbed Mount Fuji is a fool. He who has climbed Mount Fuji twice is also a fool. Anyone aspiring to be a scientist should go into the Cantorian swamp once to see what it is like, so as to know that he should never go there again. I lived there, and yes, you can develop some immunity. You can be fairly stable in the long run, but it's definitely a horrible place and will grind you down. There is a periodicity to the accumulation and integration of information. I call this oscillation fluff and strip. In the fluff phase, you build up your hierarchical structure and begin to think you're God's gift to the earth. Near the top of the fluff phase, you note a small correctable error in your design. In the course of fixing the error, you notice another, then another, and pretty soon the entire structure comes tumbling down, which is the strip phase. Then at the bottom of the strip phase, you think about ropes and slip knots and low-hanging tree branches. After a couple dozen of these sine waves, you realize that becoming emotionally involved with your own ideas is counterproductive. After all, most ideas achieved by forced induction are doomed to fail by the very nature of forced induction. Hence, I don't get emotional when I think I have a good idea. I simply continue to check it out until I toss it into the circular good idea file. But it is also in the nature of forced induction that a residue of truth will begin to accumulate, raising the bottom of the strip phase. You learn from the experience of thinking. And overall, it is actually much faster than free induction. That's why we have a rapidly increasing civilization. We are accumulating knowledge that doesn't get erased when we die, because it's being written down and studied by the next generation that builds on those accumulated facts. All that forced induction doesn't have to be redone. In order to prove some proposition is true, one must adopt a set of postulates. These are themselves propositions that you accept as true without proof, because they appear to be self-evident. Postulates are the means of proof. Unless you have a set of postulates, you can't prove anything about existence. Judging by the enormous variability of what individuals consider to be self-evident, postulates are not generally built on solid ground. Hence, deductions from them that are said to prove a hypothesis are faulty as well. To correct a faulty postulate requires third-degree forced induction. Since almost no one will do this, people generally just take what's given to them in school or what they acquire by social osmosis from others. When people exhort others to think outside the box, what they are referring to, most often without consciously understanding what they are saying, is that all of us are ensconced in our own logic or fact boxes and think that that's all there is. We exist within a box of possibilities defined by the walls of that box. If we examine it thoroughly and can't find the way out, We aver that there is no solution to a given problem. To get out of the box, it is necessary to completely examine the inside area looking for an answer, and, finding none, you must become irritated enough to start ramming the side of the box with your shoulder. If you've grown big enough by eating everything inside the box, ramming it will cause it to turn over on its side, and you just walk out the open top and find yourself in a yet bigger box. If you are in a fact box, someone else can point out the fact that you are missing, and that turns the box over and you get released that way. It's the logic boxes that are hard to get out of. You go to every corner and get logically blocked and assert that there is no way out. But if there is a question of logic that you can't answer, it is proof that you are in a logic box. If you can answer every question about existence except one, you are in the last logic box. You are finished. And there will always be one question, the answer to which you can never understand, because it will be on the top of the hierarchy. I've knocked over several logic boxes, but I still have more than one question, so I'm not done. In doing forced induction, you must guess the answer, then test it in the real world by experiment. The initial guess I call first-degree speculation. Let's say the odds of your guess being right is 1 in 10. Now, if you just assume that it's right without empirical testing, and speculate upon the next level up as though the previous were proven, I call this second-degree speculation. If the odds of the second speculation are again 1 in 10, the odds of your being on the right track are now 10 times 10, or 1 in 100. If, similarly, you advance to third-degree speculation, again at 10 to 1, the odds of you being right degenerate to 1 in 1,000. At fourth-degree speculation, people agree with you completely while surreptitiously dialing for the men in white uniforms to take you to a rubber conference room. Sometimes you may be forced to go to second-degree speculation, but third and higher should always set off alarms in your head. Empiricism is taking as true only what is externally validated by experiment. Rationalism is constructing hypothetical reasons for what is detected in the external environment. Empiricism cannot in principle explain phenomena. All that empirical experiments provide is more data. Rationalism can formulate an explanation of existence, but the induced construction cannot be verified within rationalism. No valid explanation of existence can be derived without both in equal measure, that is, rationalism informed by empiricism. Thus, induction is to be validated by deduction to a conclusive, successful experiment. Absolute proof of any postulate can only be obtained by exhaustion. That is, if every possibility has been eliminated but one, that one must be the answer. This is why we are frustrated inside of a logic box. It seems like we've exhausted all possibilities, yet no satisfactory answer is obtained. The universe itself is proven by infinite demonstration, analogous to the above argument. There is a monkey in the wrench of logic. The advancement of knowledge generates its own resistance, analogous to lens resistance in electromagnetic theory. As we accumulate knowledge, some will try to destroy that edifice. These are sophists. The main tool of sophistry I call conduction. It is related to induction and deduction. In the hierarchy of knowledge, the most used concepts are those that subsume those below them. That's why they're placed on the top. They are most used because they are common to all things, or more things than those below. So we might assert that freedom leads to prosperity, that in turn leads to security. Freedom has greater commonality than security. The sophist will pick up the hierarchy from the security section and assert that from security comes prosperity, and this in turn leads to freedom. So it ends up that freedom is slavery. That is, if you are willing to be a slave to the state, prosperity is sure to follow, and thus you will know freedom from want. Thus, logic flows in the opposite direction, so we can reason in either direction and go in circles. This is why I call it conduction. This never gets empirical validation, but young people can be fooled into it because it just seems right. There are conservatives and liberals in everything. It is the job of the liberal to propose changes to the existing structure because it always needs maintenance and improvement. It is the job of the conservative to prevent changes from being made because most new ideas are no good and will destroy all or part of the existing structure. Both are correct in general. One or the other is correct in the specific. The challenge is to do the right thing specifically. I have no advice to offer except to try to go with the highest product of experience multiplied by honesty. The objective proof of intellectual experience is output. If a person says he thinks about such and such all the time and is greatly interested in it, look at his output in that genre. Someone who has great experience will naturally display that experience by making something or doing something that proves his interest in the designated subject. If they have nothing, they are simply lying to you and very possibly to themselves. When confronted by someone claiming some authority in some subject, you may simply ask for verification of authority by saying, "Where's your stuff?" If he has no stuff, you may safely dismiss him as inexperienced. When I encounter strong disagreement about something in my videos, I've learned that invariably they have nothing of their own to offer. It's like they've come to my poker game without table stakes, yet expect to play as an equal. Regardless of the extent and quality of your thinking, you will have little influence over civilization. I've calculated the influence of one average person on the earth presently to be about 1 drop in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. My influence is more because I have a YouTube channel of very modest success. So I guess my influence over the Earth's direction is about 1 drop in one of those 15-foot round backyard swimming pools about 4 feet deep, which is to say roughly zip. Regardless of the lack of influence of any one individual, the drops do add up to fill the pool. So keep thinking as rationally as possible and the world will get incrementally better over centuries. With the internet, I think it's down to only decades now.